Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Jacob Schepis back on the show, and we're talking about all things kind of further education for coaches or for just invested trainees and competitors, and how social media can make that pretty tricky also for educators to share information, but also should you really be learning on social media, and how should we go about kind of learning and further educating ourselves. I think it's just a very interesting and relevant discussion to have. And also, as a reminder, we did co-author The Ultimate Guide to Contest Prep with Jacob Schepis, and that is available as an ebook or hardcover book. Definitely check it out if you're thinking about competing or taking someone to stage. It has you covered. So guys, without further ado, let's get into the show. Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Jacob Schepis back on the podcast. This is your third time, I think, officially on the podcast, which seems ridiculous because of how much we speak. It feels like you've been on way more than this, but the last time Jacob was on, for those who aren't aware of Jacob, he was on episode 161, which is actually quite a while ago, 2019, like this sort of time of the year, where we talked about digging through a contest prep, which is funny because I just released a reel which was taking your analogy of that, which people really enjoyed, and I think it's a fantastic analogy. But for those of you who don't know who Jacob is, he's the Director of JPS Health and Fitness, Physique and Powerlifting coach, and he co-authored The Ultimate Guide to Contest Prep with us, which we think is still a fantastic book and we'd highly recommend, of course. And he's someone I highly respect for the position that he's in, and that's partly why I have him on to talk about the topic that we've got today, which is kind of, I guess you kind of talked about it just off air in terms of like furthering your professional development as maybe a coach within the industry, or even just someone who's looking to educate themselves further as a kind of serious dedicated trainee or competitive bodybuilder, and you may be self-coaching, because Jacob himself, like I said, he's the Director of JPS Health and Fitness, who have lots of coaches under them. So he's educating coaches. So I think he's one of the best people to talk about this, especially because we're kind of in a similar niche as well. So yeah, Jacob, thank you for taking the time to come on, because this is where we're talking to an Australian here.
Yes, you are. Thank you for having me, man. It has been a while. I think pre-COVID was probably the last time we had a chat, and a lot has changed since then. But yeah, I think it's always good to talk to you, man.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it says it all. If I know a lot of gyms struggled through that whole period of time, and no doubt that was a struggle for you, but I think it says a lot that you're now, I believe, in a position where you're kind of thriving again and things are going really well for you. So I think that just says a lot to the business that you've developed as well.
Yeah, we were fortunate that we had a lot of the systems and processes sort of in place to transition online during COVID. We focused heavily on all of our educational services that we provide online. So that was, really good opportunity for us to focus on those. And obviously, not being able to coach for a couple of years was pretty tough down here in Australia, but we made it through, and we lived to tell the tale.
Yeah, and I'm glad about that. So the topic
Thanks,
for today,
man.
or kind of the way definitely glad about that. And I can only imagine it. To me, it feels like it never happened almost. I don't know if you're quite through the wounds and you've recovered from it, but it's crazy to have thought all of that kind of went through, and we've come out the other end, and I think everyone's glad about that. So to go on today's topic anyway for us, Jacob, something I'd seen, and we kind of spoke off air about it, and I know you've seen it too, is kind of the growth of social media, and how obviously we're in a social media age, but it feels like it's grown ever more. I think TikTok really exploded some of this, and sort of this element of self-proclaimed experts on topics where maybe they have like zero actual formal qualifications. Not to say that you can't become kind of very expert in a field through kind of self-taught, but they have very little experience maybe with clients, even with themselves maybe, and they're maybe even just getting their information. Now they're teaching across these platforms, but they're learning just from these platforms. It's almost like it's just regurgitated kind of information where some of the nuances may be lost, and it kind of, they also are of this social media age where maybe they know like diversive content gets the clicks and that gets me attention. And so I'm going to make everything maybe a bit more black and white than even I know it is. And then people are learning and kind of educating themselves through that, maybe even up and coming coaches or even trainees, because like it's just ever present and in our face. So I don't know if that brings about any thoughts to you, or if you've seen the same sort of thing happening.
Yeah, I definitely have, man. We absolutely live in an age where information is abundant and the currency of the marketplace is attention. And this makes, in my opinion, acquiring a robust understanding of the world or a topic a very tall order. And it's become more and more difficult for people to acquire a depth of knowledge in a specific domain because they're not learning about things or acquiring information from the same sources that they once were. They no longer have to read an article from start to finish. They no longer have to go to university to watch a lecture. They can watch it online on YouTube. And this is, a challenge that we certainly face. And I think, when we think about the information that we get, there's a whole heap of, problems that we can discuss. But at the end of the day, we're trying to use that information to gain knowledge and understanding, right? Like that's the purpose of acquiring that information or consuming it. And obviously there's a difference between entertainment and something that is education. And for the purpose of our conversation, I think a lot of your listeners, I'm sure if they're listening to a podcast like this, they're not just looking for entertainment, although there's got to be that element to it because it has to be engaging. It's got to keep your attention, but it also has to be educational. So if we're consuming information that's, for the purpose of, developing our knowledge, we need to understand what knowledge is, right? And by definition, it's the information, understanding, and skills that we gain through education or formal education or experience, right? Now, obviously, if we're consuming things online, it's part of an educational process. It's not necessarily through experience because we're not doing it. And the goal of the knowledge, I think, for coaches is, to become more effective at their job, right? Which is writing programs, teaching people how to move, helping them with their nutrition. And the same can be said for lifters, but they're just using it for a very, selfish purpose, right? And a model that I think is really useful in setting the framework for this conversation is one that I stumbled across years ago. It's called the Data, Information, Knowledge, Wisdom Pyramid, which is basically a model that represents a relationship between data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. So each sort of layer, moving from data all the way up to wisdom, is a step towards a higher level of understanding. So first you have data, which is like raw, and it exists in isolation, right? So it's collected through measurement, observations, could be quantitative, qualitative, things that are more so like, facts, like carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram. Then when you have multiple sort of pieces of data that, you can connect together and you can extract some value from connecting them together, you have information. And that's more like definite knowledge that you acquire through all of those data points, right? So say, for example, that when we consume carbohydrates, our insulin levels increase, right? And then the third level is like knowledge, which is what we want essentially, which is a step further on that scale and involves understanding all of the information that you have in the data points and how they all work together, but being able to use that to answer questions, to solve problems, make decisions, and so on. So using that carbohydrate example, if you consume carbohydrates, yes, they raise insulin levels, but if you're in a calorie deficit, those insulin levels don't really matter because the net balance over time will still mean that you will lose fat. And then on the final level, wisdom, which is kind of like a voodoo sort of level here, but it's essentially an all-encompassing knowledge that you use everything that you know in a responsible and quote unquote wise manner, right? And I think that model is important because at the moment we have a lot of people on social media, different platforms, putting out a lot of different bits and sound bites of information that is very much focused on getting attention, clicks, likes, and moving its way up through the algorithm. And when people consume this, they don't necessarily always have the foundational knowledge, which is that understanding of, the principles and, the key concepts and theories that sort of govern all this information and data, to synthesize that in a way to help them solve problems. So they're just left with all these bits of information that they can memorize or parrot back. And they can use sort of snippets of information and make them sound more educated. But this has, very little to do with knowledge. And it can be done without an understanding because they can't really make use of that information. So I think with that out of the way, it's really important to then think of knowledge as, what you know about a topic and then what you're able to use in terms of your understanding of the topic to help you solve problems, right? Like that's the key sort of idea of having knowledge. Otherwise, what's the point? And in the context of like what we do, Steve, coaching people and obviously educating lifters and stuff, there's two types of knowledge that, I've sort of talked about in our mentorship and various things like this. There's what's called declarative knowledge, which is like your knowing knowledge, right? So that's based on readily available information or research. And this information can help you establish a more foundational framework through which you can express, the art of decision making. And it's very much important for your conceptual understanding of how things work. Okay. And it doesn't tell you what is optimal for everyone necessarily. It's like, we know that a calorie deficit will lead to fat loss, but that doesn't tell us the optimal size of the calorie deficit, how we then structure a diet, how many calories somebody should be on. But these things are very important. And we need to then sort of use that within our understanding of the evidence-based practice model where we have that, science and the knowledge, and then we have to apply that to the individual, use our experience and so on. And, when we pursue declarative knowledge, which is what people are doing essentially when they consume information online, right? They're trying to get information to help them better understand how they know something. Okay. In many cases, sometimes it's practical knowledge, but most of the time, in our sort of circles, it's the information-based, knowledge that they're getting. And the issue here is this kind of knowledge is best pursued through formal education, right? That's why they have degrees, postgraduates, and all these kind of things, which actually teach you everything you need to know about this topic. But a lot of people aren't getting that. And instead they're getting, they're doing their own self-directed learning, which is fine. But in my experience, what I've observed, there's a lot of issues there because it's not structured, right? It's not purposeful. It's not actual education. It's just consumption. And I'm sure there's plenty that we can go into after that, but I think that sort of lays the land for how I'm looking at everything that's going on at the moment.
Yeah, I love that kind of everything from information up to wisdom, and kind of it's like connecting the dots, and lots of people are missing those connections because insulin's a great example where you'll get someone touting carbs then lead to an increase in insulin and therefore you're going to store fat. And it's like, so carbs are bad because of insulin. And it's like, and then you bring that new layer of like knowledge and understanding, connecting the dots of like the calorie deficit, if that's occurring. And then again, you'll get people just shouting calorie deficit and like fat loss is easy, it's just calorie deficit. And they're missing all the other pieces of information of what leads to that calorie deficit and sort of thing like that. But on social media, especially like the growth of Reels, TikTok, they're literally like you said, the entertainment, they're trying to catch and draw attention. How much can you educate someone in? Like, I'm sure you're frustrated with it too. And so, like, I'm seeing all these providers like Andy Morgan doing similar setup in terms of Reels and like talking to the camera and trying to like talk about, answer a question or a topic. And I'm sure he's frustrated too with like, there's just only so much you can give someone in that period of time. So, but we're having to kind of go there to hopefully, I guess, like for you guys, lead people to that kind of education platform that is your mentorship eventually, or I can lead people to longer format with our not ebook, well, it's an ebook and a hardcover, but like our ultimate guide to contest prep, or to a podcast. But it's like you said, even I think I've heard a lot of, and podcasts, obviously I do them for a reason. I think they're great to explore topics, but have people on, and there's a reason why when I get like two smart people on, they go on for like 2 hours because they could talk to a topic for ages, and there's so much that probably, and I'm sat there sometimes, I don't have a fundamental knowledge and understanding of some of these things that they're going into to fully understand that and grasp that. And that's where a formal education might be beneficial to come in and help kind of guide that kind of conversation a bit more. But yeah, it's people are pulling these little like sound bites and then they're just like parroting them, and then that's leading to more kind of misinformation, and the people with the most entertaining message or the most kind of the best physiques and things like this are the ones that are drawing attention. If people aren't careful and they're spending hours of time on these platforms trying to learn, it's like, and like you said, that's such an unstructured way of learning. Like I know I've done it where I've been trying to gather information about a topic, and maybe I'm listening to various bits of podcasts. I'm like, man, it'd be really nice, and maybe there is like just one place where I could go through it like a systematic way of just learning about this topic. But people don't like to do that.
No, usually it involves a lot of debt and a lot of years at a university, right? But no, you're spot on, man. I think you raised a really good point. Like there's people who are just like taking things and then recreating that content, sending that message, and they don't really know what they're talking about. They're just regurgitating it. I actually don't mind if people do that. I'm not sure what my position is on this yet, but I think I don't mind if they're doing it in a way that is ethically correct, morally correct, and they're not doing it just to, peddle their own shit. But they're right. If they're accurate, if the information they're putting out is accurate, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Say, for example, somebody listens to Mike Israetel and he talks about, nutrition for muscle gain and, that you need to eat between 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilo body weight per day. And there's somebody who doesn't understand even what that is. They're talking about eating protein and they regurgitate that soundbite and they put out that information. There's an issue there, obviously, because they don't know where that information's come. They probably haven't fact-checked Mike. They don't know, the specific context where that might be applicable, that you might need more protein if you're in a hypocaloric condition, at the end of a contest prep, risk of muscle loss, all these kind of things. But it's not necessarily bad advice, right? And if it's well-intentioned and it's accurate, I'm okay with that. But I still think if you're a content creator and somebody who is pushing educational content, you have a duty of care to your audience. And that's where you should do your due diligence and go out and try to better understand that topic so that if people question you about things, you have an answer. And I think that's the same for coaches. Coaches not only need to know the right information, but they need to know why that's the right information and how they got there so that then they can understand the specific context that will be applicable in and where it won't be applicable in. And this is why not all information is created equally. Obviously, some information is factually incorrect, but some information comes from credible sources who actually know what they're talking about versus other people who are just regurgitating it. And it's very hard to differentiate the two in the current climate of, social media. Very difficult because who's not to, say that these people who are putting out this information that is factually correct know their shit. We don't know if they've read thousands of peer review papers, that they might have a PhD in a different area, but they've just decided to start honing their skills into, nutritional sciences and muscle physiology, whatever the case may be. We don't know. But I think that the good thing at the moment is it's good and bad. I'd love to hear your opinion on it, actually, Steve. With call out culture, I think it's a socially self-correcting phenomena where basically anyone who puts out dog shit information is getting penalized big time socially for it, right? It's like they're getting stoned, back in the day for stealing a loaf of bread. It's like the same thing. And I think it's okay if there's somebody who is of poor intentions and they do it repeatedly, and it's not just an honest mistake one time where they might have misinterpreted something or just had an oversight, because that happens. I don't think you should vilify people for that. That's where you might send a DM and say, hey, I saw this happened. Just want to, have a chat with you about it. How'd you get to this sort of conclusion? What are your thoughts on this? Because I've, seen this, You have a conversation about it. If they then go back and they don't correct themselves, don't apologize and do these things, okay, then it's a different story. But I think it's kind of a good thing because we're holding people to a higher burden of, proof essentially when it comes to putting out content. But on the side of the person who's consuming information, such as your listeners listening to this today, I think it's really important to consider how you approach your consumption of information. Information consumption has to be strategic. Otherwise, you will get lost. You will become, confused. You'll drown in all the different sound bites, and you won't really have, any direction or purpose to what you're consuming. And that's where it becomes, a pointless endeavor, really. If you're following educational companies like, JPS and Revive Stronger, if you don't have some deliberate plan and consider the following things. So where and who you source information from, right? So that means you've got to understand your platforms. What's the purpose of that platform? Is it for entertainment or education? TikTok isn't for education. There are people who use TikTok who provide educational content, but come on, anyone who goes there to learn, you're really not going to learn much. Social media is designed for novelty, right? It's not purposeful education. You need to consider like who you're getting that information from, right? Some people focus on the clickbait, gaining your attention, making money, versus some people providing useful information. So you have to always be thinking about the sources that you're getting that info from, and how much you buy into certain types of information. So again, thinking about the platforms as well as who, right? If Mike Israetel puts out information, even if it's a reel, because it's Mike Israetel and I know who he is, he's a credible source, I take that a little bit more seriously than if, say, Kayla Itsteins or something like that puts out a reel and, tells me how to build glutes, right? So that's really, the fundamentals of like consuming information on these platforms. But then most importantly is what you do with that information. And here's what I mean by that. You can consume and it goes in one ear, out the other, it entertains you for 30, 60 seconds. You swipe up onto the next. That isn't going to help your education. You are not going to gain any knowledge, right? You just got entertained and you helped that person climb the algorithm. If you liked it, engaged, whatever. You have to digest and process that information, whether it's short form or long form content. If you want to learn and you want to gain knowledge, you need to take notes. Write down questions that you have about that information. Things for further reading. Okay, they reference this. What's that reference? Maybe I'll go look that up. They mentioned, this book that, they quoted or whatever. Okay, I'm going to go check that book out. Because education is different to consumption, as I hope people are starting to see. It has to be structured and compartmentalized. And I think you will get a lot more out of it if you break it down into specific topics. And I know this worked really well for me over the years, is I'd have a year where I was focused on one specific thing. Like broadly speaking though, but like I'd have a year where I'd focus on, okay, I'm going to learn about training, whether it's biomechanics, muscle growth, strength, technique. But that was like my training year. I just learned about training. Then the next year is about nutrition. Then the next year is about like communication. And I don't always periodize my learning. And I know you'll fucking love this. You're like, yes, periodization.
You got to periodize everything.
You're a stickler for routine, structure, and organization. And that's why you're so good at what you do. That's why you have so much knowledge and your business is thriving and, succeeding in the way it does, because there is direction and purpose, but there is also some specific structure to how you go about the things within the business. And if people are going to do this as a career, whether it's with their business or education, right, which is their, bread and butter essentially, they have to be, compartmentalizing things and having a plan as to how they approach all of this shit. Otherwise, you're just going to go into social media, scroll for hours every day and just waste time. And you're not going to get anything out of it. You can get a lot more out of it. Use social media as a segue to long form content and make it a part of your self-directed education and your career pathway, basically. Find the bits of information that you like, that are interesting to you, and go out and read more about them. Take notes, find other credible sources, read some direct research. If you can't, find a research review on that topic, find some books, and then start to really hone that educational process from there. But if you're relying on the social media as your only source of education information, oh man, I really question how much knowledge you're going to get from that.
Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We created the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
I think that, you touched on tons of things I want to kind of touch on, but the differentiation between consumption and like education is so well said, because I think I know myself, I do it where I'll listen to a podcast or maybe an audiobook and I'll be walking outside and I'll have heard some really good bits of information. And then I'll kind of the next day I'll be like, I can't remember anything. I have to literally write notes as I'm kind of listening to these things, or even reading a book, underlining things, scoring things out, kind of making notes on the side, because otherwise it's like in one ear, out the other. And that's like what social media is brilliant for, is you just flick and you forget, flick and forget. And so, yeah, if you're not, and something I do as a content producer, and we're talking about it off air in terms of bringing on guests for podcasts, is I love social media for trying to learn about a guest, but I go find a post, they talk about a topic, and then I'm like, right, have they talked about that on a podcast, right? I can hear them talking more depth about that subject, so I can ask some good questions and not just like, you know, just pick these like 5 Instagram posts and just pick each one and like that's what we're going to talk about, because it doesn't give them the opportunity there. Something you spoke about, and I agree, if someone's listening to like a credible source and then they just share that they kind of regurgitate that information, I don't see that as bad, because like you said, it's like, it's still valuable information that's kind of valid. I think the issue maybe comes in when someone shares something from someone when it isn't valid, and then that kind of spirals. Do you see there being any kind of red flags that can help people identify someone who is maybe someone like you mentioned, Mike Israetel or an Eric Helms, Brad Schoenfeld, these kind of credible people that we obviously inherently know about, but maybe there's new people coming up, and how do I kind of, are there things you look out for to identifying if someone seems like they're kind of going to be a credible source that we can kind of trust a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I put up a post a couple of years ago. It had a comparison between an influencer, who I think is actually a good thing. Somebody who can influence people is a very powerful person. So influencers, good. And influenza, like a virus, bad, right? So influencers, in my opinion, are people who are helpful and beneficial. And that undertone, it's always there in their content. They're meaning well. They're trying to help. There's no clear red flags for them, trying to sell you a product or just promote their services and things like that. They're self-aware and respectful. They're very much, cognizant of their role as an influencer and how important that is. And they're, nice and polite to people. I think that's a really important trait in somebody who is credible, usually. And they're authentic and genuine. Right? It's like nobody has to be 100% authentic on social media, because at the end of the day, it's a highlight reel. You can't be, it's not realistic. But they're genuine, right? There's not a huge discrepancy between who they are in person, who they are online, and their focus is very much leadership oriented. They're somebody who is concerned about not only helping people, but furthering those around them and their community. So you can look out for, these kind of things in just how somebody goes about putting out their content. On the other hand, you've got an influencer, which is someone who's not very helpful. It's attention seeking, right? They're usually like the social media unicorns, where they could just put up a 6-pack shot with, a 1-word caption, and they get like, hundreds of thousands of likes, right? They don't have to put in any effort to get engagement. They're very self-absorbed, right? It's all about them. There's not anything there that's worried about you, the follower, the consumer. And they're somewhat disrespectful, that, I guess ignorant of their power and their position to be able to help a lot of people. And this is obviously very much fitness space oriented, right?
Sure.
And any sort of traces of them being disingenuous or not very authentic and status focused, also sort of big red flags, right? For who you should be looking to consume your information. And then there's sort of the big, checklist in terms of, is this information, credible, and are they a pseudo expert or a real expert? There's a lot more in terms of what they say now, right? Not sort of who they are and how they say it. Okay. So sort of pseudo experts, they use hyperbole and they exaggerate, right? There's a lot of exaggeration in their claims, right? And, the larger the claim, the more evidence you need to support it. These people usually don't have that evidence, and they provide like a cure-all or a fix-all or a one-size-fits-all approach. And they usually speak in absolutes, always, never. They don't reference, or they cherry pick data. There's a lack of context. Like, it's just, information without any caveats and nuance. They're never wrong, these people, ever. And they won't admit it, right? If they get called out, they block or they delete, right? This is the kind of person that you should absolutely be curious and concerned about. They use, appeals to authority. They use logical fallacies. they're just intellectually dishonest, right? They ignore or hide their biases, conflicts of interest, and usually their level of conviction, so how confident they are in what they know, exceeds their actual knowledge, right? That's usually a pseudo expert right there. On the other hand, an actual expert is basically the opposite of that. They're realistic about, what they promote. They promote realistic timeframes with what's achievable, with their advice and things like that. If they propose a solution, it's very specific to a specific, problem or a specific set of problems and context. They use probabilities when they talk, so potentially, highly likely, maybe, unlikely, things like this, like never absolutes, like always never. They're usually very, well-versed with the research, or at least their field, right? You don't always need a reference to know what you talk about, but you've got to adhere to the fundamental principles, right? They're very principle-oriented, these people. So they, can explain things from a principles up, process, right? It's not just here's a piece of information. It's like, here's this information or this method of programming that works, but here's why, because, it's specificity, progressive overload, fatigue management, then they understand how those things interrelate. They're usually, very aware of what they don't know. It's like they know their limitations, right? And they will always be willing to sort of admit that. They don't give specifics. They usually outline ranges. So I've never seen you, Steve, promote you need to have 1.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. It's a range. Yeah. Rate of fat loss, 0.5 to 1%. It's never a specific number. And they're committed to lifelong learning. And usually, as the opposite of a pseudo expert, their conviction in their knowledge, or the conviction in the way they talk, usually lines up pretty well with their actual knowledge. In fact, people who aren't really familiar with them and don't see them as an expert might not think that they're an actual expert because they're not overly convincing, or they don't try to convince. And that's the real tricky part, I reckon, Steve, is that the people who actually know their shit, they're going to be like, oh yeah, like in certain situations, like they're not going to be like, if you feel this and you experience this in the gym, then you must do this. Like that gets people who don't know anything about, training, for example, to go, oh wow, this guy knows what he's talking about. Look how confident he is. But then you might have someone like Eric Helms be like, yeah, I guess there's situations where this might be a potential reason to, say, take a few sets back. That doesn't sound very convincing to me as a beginner in the gym who's, just trying to figure this stuff out. I want the guy who knows and is confident in what he's telling me, right? So, yeah, I think those things are really important to look out for, in who you're consuming information from.
I think that was brilliantly explained, from just like the almost personality of that individual and what they're using the platform for, and generally just for the greater good. And they're kind of kind and empathetic individual who are like looking out for their followers versus just that person who's kind of looking out for themselves. And those I don't really see someone who is that way also then being kind of like black and white with their statements and that sort of thing. And likewise, someone who's like in it for themselves generally isn't using like maybe and ranges, and like is being kind of careful with their language. And it's funny, I think Brad actually shared something yesterday, Brad Schoenfeld, about kind of how it's important to use those kind of precursors in terms of the ranges and the maybes and the kind of maybe or kind of in this case, or I like that, I forget what it is, the squiggle on the keyboard, it's like around, I forget what that thing's called, but I use it all the time, like next to a number, I'm like, it's around this, because
the average.
Something along those lines. So and I commented on it. I was like, you're a great example of this, because Brad does it all the time. But I mean, I've had him on enough times on the podcast and seen the comments on YouTube where people are like, this guy doesn't seem sure about anything. Like, there's so much research about hypertrophy, but why hasn't he got the answer yet? Or something along these lines. It's just like, man, that's unfortunate, because I think there are people that listen to this podcast are generally well educated and they understand these things. But I think inherently I don't know if it's probably in the book, like our chimp brain, that sort of thing, or the chimp paradox, that sort of thing, where we just do seek out like easy answers. And so I think I'm probably even kind of someone who ends up doing it, where if I see someone who's really confident about what they're speaking about, and there's some absolutism in there, and I don't know, I feel like I warm to them and trust them, and they're very kind of easy to engage with. Like, it's hard to pull yourself away and be like, actually, wait a minute, I need to question that. So you're right. I think that is exactly where a lot of these educators maybe struggle to explode, or someone, I guess Mike would be a good example of someone who he is he's not this, like, he doesn't talk in absolutes at all. He talks with confidence and he is somewhat entertaining. So he kind of uses that angle to draw people to his content. Whereas like other people, I imagine, well, like it's hard to be as entertaining as Mike. So I think that really helps him grow on social media. But I think, we get into this trap for a lot of us where we're struggling to grow because we're not getting to that position. And that actually brings me to a thought in terms of some of the content you've been putting out with some of the reels, where you kind of, I see you start with maybe a bit of not an absolutism, but maybe like a thing where you're like, one of them was the deload. It was like, you shouldn't be deloading every...
It's called so see, I hate this, Steve. I've had to give it the time. I like writing. As you know, we've co-authored a book together. I love doing the really detailed infographics where I can put, pen to paper, finger to button and actually like bang something up. But now Instagram, the fuckers, right, have changed the algorithms and it's all about videos because they're trying to keep up with TikTok. So I have to do reels, and the way that reels sort of work, or what makes them engaging, is they need to start with a hook, which is basically like a really engaging, short sentence that reels people in, right, or hooks them in, like grabs their attention. So like with that, you can't be like 3 considerations for managing fatigue.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to freaking watch that, right? It's like you have to get their attention because they're going to scroll. So oh, sorry to cut you off, but yes, they're called hooks, and I hate the fact that I have to use them, but I do my best to get people's attention and then actually hopefully leave them with just some thoughts about things. Like the one you were talking about, the deloads, was like, stop deloading every 4th week. And everyone was like, oh shit, like what's this? But then I said, like, pre-planned deloads, are only okay if you're measuring and managing fatigue, and you've got a reason and valid justification to do it. If you don't need to deload every 4th week until you start managing fatigue properly, kind of thing, or measuring fatigue properly. So it was more of a like, think about this, but I'll draw you in with right. But then again, I still had a lot of people saying, like, coming at me and misinterpreting that. And because I can only get so much in 60 seconds, it's like, fuck, man, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like, I've written a full, article. I've done a hour-long lecture for our education portal, covering that specific reel, like over an hour. It's like, so much gets lost, and that's frustrating. But as you said, we try to use these things to get people to our longer form content, hopefully follow us and not hate us after, telling them not to deload. But it's tough. It's challenging, man. It's like, it's a real battle at the moment because you're working with such limited time on social media to, get someone in and explain something that you really can't lay out all the nuances. People aren't there on those platforms to learn and become educated about the context or the, details around that thing. They just want the answer. Just tell me the answer. Tell me something interesting. Tell me something controversial so I can send it to other people. We can, have a chat about it. It's like, it's not the same platform it once was. And we need to respect and recognize that as coaches and content providers.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. And the hook is exactly what I think I end up lacking with, because I put something like, I think I even created a title for one of my reels, was like,
you're too nice.
Maybe you should use skull crushers.
Tell you this.
Yeah.
I always tell you this. You're too nice.
It was like, maybe you should use skull crushers for muscle hypertrophy, like for tricep growth. And I was like, why would I write maybe there? You're such an idiot. Just write why you should use tricep, like a skull crusher for tricep growth. And even that isn't diversive, but I'm like, oh no, I should temper it because like it doesn't have to be that way. Anyway, you're completely right in that you need that hook, and you hope that people stick around for the context behind the hook, because the thing, and I guess it happened to you, where people heard the hook, they heard the black and white statement or what it was, and then they ran with that. And maybe some people, it fit their bias, they go share it, and other people are just hearing the hook, or they dive into you and they try and learn more, which is what you hope would happen at least. And that's great because that's good for the algorithm and gets you to grow. But yeah, I'm the same way. I hate the kind of what social media demands from you, which is why I guess you see people like, I guess, Eric Helms, he doesn't even like really dabble with that. He just shares, I was on this podcast. So if you actually want to hear long form content, or like, here's my book, or the guys at RP.
The unfortunate thing is that Eric's made it, right?
Sure. Yes.
He's got, 100,000 followers, right? He produces less social media content in a year than you would in like a month, Steve, right?
True.
No, he's
Yeah.
dead set. And he's got more followers than you. He's got more followers than both of us combined, I think, at this stage. But so he doesn't need to use the platform to elevate himself in the social hierarchy of fitness or evidence-based practitioners, right? And obviously his bread and butter isn't derived from his social media following. Yours is, so is mine. People come to JPS, they find out about JPS through social media. They, purchase our services and products through social media. They get to understand the brand through social media. Eric's a researcher. He's paid by Auckland University. He's got his coaching company, sure. But you look at the guys in the coaching company who their bread and butter is coming from that. And that's, Alberto and, these guys, they're doing a lot more on social media than Eric is because they need to. And that's the unfortunate reality of our industry. We're not like, the law industry or, accounting or economics or anything like this, where you go to work, you do your job, social media is part of your hobby, right? That you use to, engage with friends and learn about what's going on in the world. Ours is, social media is our work. It's a part of our work. It's a part of our marketing strategy, right? And that's what makes it really tricky, because even though you don't want to do reels and I don't want to do fucking reels, like I look at some of your reels, I'm like, I know Steve's feeling the same way about these as I am. I know we're in the same boat here. It's like we do them. It's cool when they like sort of land and they get a lot of engagement. It's like, yeah, fuck, that's cool. Because it feels like that with every post, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a reel or not. But I know that you're like me and you're not a big fan of the reels, because it does miss all the juicy stuff that we like to talk about. Like we've spoken about this for nearly an hour. It's like, I can't talk about that on a reel, right? That doesn't satisfy me on any level because it's just so bland. There's no intellectual stimulation for me, like talking about something on a reel for 60 seconds and missing all the other important things. But we do it, and we have to do it to stay relevant and to continue to elevate ourselves and position ourselves in the industry so that we get clients, so that we have, money coming into the bank, so we put food on the table. It's like, it's a really unfortunate reality of the current, fitness space. And compared to a lot of other industries, like I do empathize with a lot of companies who are having to do this stuff sort of unwillingly to stay in the game. It's tough.
Yeah. I think this is a useful discussion, not just for coaches who might be on the platform trying to share information like us and try and like they are using social media for a similar reason, is to kind of keep their client base, but even those who are
consuming,
consuming, because now you're hearing from two individuals who are struggling with the platform for education. Like it's not our ideal platform.
Other coaching companies are doing the same thing as us.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, as a consumer, this is really important information to know, because now when you see all this information coming from fitness professionals, you're like, fuck, these people are just putting out this information, like the sort of sound bites of what they actually know in some cases. In some cases, they're just doing it for clickbait, whatever it is, because they're trying to run a business. So it works on both ends. It's a really important conversation. I think one that a lot of people have sort of just been swept up in. Like it's a situation where it's just sort of grabbed us and swept us into it. We haven't really made any conscious decisions. I don't think a lot of people have to, okay, what's happening here? What are we doing? It's just like, okay, everyone's doing reels now. Let's do reels. Like, I'm sure you didn't sit down with Pascal and have this like full on plan, like, okay, reels, what's our strategy for the next 6 months? Are we going to do this? It was just like, fuck, people doing reels. We should do this. Then it's like, people doing TikTok. Fuck, we got to do this. Right. Because we don't know. Yeah. Okay, what's the success rate of fitness professionals on TikTok, like in terms of engagement, sales, and this over the last 12 months? Fuck knows. People haven't been using it for 12 months, but we do it anyway. And it's a really, like, we're in a really weird time in the fitness space, and I'm very interested to see what happens. Hopefully, maybe in a year or two, we can sit down and reconvene and go, "Fuck, remember those real things that we had to do." That would be nice.
Yeah, I really hope not. It was, I mean, before Reels, I felt like it was, well, like infographics were the big thing. And they, for a time, were good. And I think definitely a step up from Reels, because you could actually put in, and I mean, your guys' infographics were like probably too detailed in some instances. Same with some of mine. But at least you could like get people to swipe, and you have like decent amount of information.
You could actually
save
put some like informative stuff in there, and people would have to take the time to read it. It wasn't over in 30 seconds. That's the big difference there, is people could sit down and consume it, and they'd, pinch in on mine and like zoom them in and be like, okay, but they'd read it. Whereas with reels, there's someone talking, there's things popping up, there's shit flashing. You can't learn like that, right?
No.
Completely different purpose of a reel versus, a 10 carousel swipe across with detailed infographics about one topic. And I think, they were a step up in terms of the education. And that's what we're talking about today is like, becoming more educated as a lifter or a coach. It's like the different types of content, even within the same platform, should be looked at differently in a part of your strategic educational plan. Like, okay, if I consume reels, what am I going to do when I like watch these things? Okay, maybe I'll have ones where I like them and they're actually informative. I'll save them and I'll go back and look at that reel and write down some notes about that. And you spend an hour, every night where you watch the reels that were good and informative, and you take some notes and you put some, comments there. Okay, I'm going to do some further reading on this from this person. I'm going to read this research paper, and maybe that's useful. I don't know, but I think in isolation, just consuming them, scrolling, probably not very helpful.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality, and we know how to do it, and we will help you achieve this. The Minicut Movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the Minicut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The Minicut Movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.
And something I wanted to draw back to was I have this kind of idea of, and I don't know if you can put it in a pure hierarchy, but kind of like a hierarchy of knowledge and information to consume, where I would think of something like, I don't know, a university degree might be somewhere near that base, and like just going to school and that sort of thing. And then somewhere at the top is something like social media and reels, and like taking people through that. Because something I always pull myself back to is I look over at my shelf and I'm like, man, there's so many textbooks there. If I just need to kind of think about something, I just pick up Brad Schoenfeld's like hypertrophy textbook. I'm like, right, it's got that, everything I need is right there. I can even go find the paper and things, and I can spend an hour looking at that. You just described an hour of like looking at reels. Maybe someone doesn't even need to go there. They can just like, they can find Ultimate Guide to Contest Prep, spend an hour reading that. You've read like a quarter of the book. Think about how, and then like write notes on that. You're going to learn a heck of a lot more doing that sort of thing. So
okay,
I don't know
what's on your bookshelf, Steve? Tell us, like seriously, like tell the listeners what's on your bookshelf.
So, I guess some keys for me would be, I mean, like Brad's hypertrophy textbook is like, that's in-depth stuff. Like below that are things like the muscle and strength pyramids. They're great, kind of ease yourself in. Our Ultimate Guide to Contest Prep, not as like in-depth as where Brad's book is, where it talks about like a lot of the mechanisms and the biology and to like huge details. We even say that it's not at that level, but ours is specific to like contest prep. And then you have like the RP kind of ebooks that are kind of ready available, and they're like probably a step above the muscle and strength pyramids and some of the information they go through. But it's kind of like sorting through those, and you can't read it once and understand everything. You read it like 5 times, and now you're like, oh wow, now that's thinking in. And then you hear things said in podcasts or you see them on reels, and then you're like, oh, this is reinforcing the information that I've learned from this foundational knowledge of this kind of textbook.
Or it's contrary to it, and that should be a red flag for,
yes,
hey, do I take this on face value and just believe it? Or do I go try to, fact check it and be a little bit more skeptical about that person who's putting out that information? So I think you hit the nail on the head there. You've got to have some foundational sort of resources that are the building blocks for your acquisition of knowledge. All of the books that you just recommended. If you can do some reputable courses like our mentorship, we have a bunch of experts on there. There are a heap of other courses online. RP are doing a nutrition course now. Yep. There's heaps of really good courses out there, but you got to find them from the right providers. Research reviews like Mass, Weightology, Alan Aragon's research review. There's probably heaps more in different sort of little pockets of the industry that I'm not aware of, but they're sort of like my go-to, right? If I want to know about a topic, I go into Mass, I search okay, muscle damage. Then it comes up with all their, latest reviews, and I'll read them and go through them. I'll watch some lectures. I go back to the books. It's like they're my foundational sort of, resources that I use to help with my knowledge. And then all the little bits of information I get, from reading a blog or this or that sort of filters through. And it's got to be checked against all of these things that I know from these really good in-depth courses and books and research reviews that I've learned from. And if it sort of passes all that and it fits into that nicely and it's, sort of a consensus, it's like, cool, that's something that makes sense.
Yeah.
And within that, I think over time, as you go through this and the more you do it, hopefully you're developing some really fundamental critical thinking skills.
Yeah.
Right. Like you can learn to think about thinking, become really meta with it all. Like you get better at thinking, right? You realize your blind spots, your flaws. You understand the limitations of the scientific method and, research. A lot of the things we've spoken about in terms of the pseudo experts and the real experts, like you're better aware of all these things so you can think about it at a much higher level and more efficiently and effectively than when you did starting out. And you just sort of know, okay, that's bullshit. Cool. This is good information. I'm going to go check this out. But yeah, it's like, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's like we were lucky. We sort of stumbled across a lot of really good people sort of really early in our careers. But there were many years there where I bought a book by John Ivey called Nutrient Timing that was basically like you had to stoke the metabolic fire every 3 hours. And me and my brother used to set our alarm, and every 3 hours we would eat. No shit, right? I used to think carbs were fattening. I bought a 700-page endocrinology textbook once because I thought hormones were the secret to fat loss. Like I got duped into some seriously stupid shit. I would have spent $400 a month on supplements that were just garbage. Like I made all those mistakes. And it was Alan Aragon who was the one who sort of, showed me the road, and helped me sort of dissect a lot of the bullshit. And he was very understanding and helpful. He private messaged me and I was like, oh my God, I read about him in forums. And then I started subscribing to his research review and I started to understand my shit a little bit better. And then from him, I got into Brad Schoenfeld, Brett Contreras, Eric Helms. And then all of a sudden I had this army of experts who in their own rights are just, legends in the fitness industry in my books that, I could use to help me with my education. And as they say, you stand on the shoulders of giants. And I was lucky that I was able to stand on those shoulders at an early stage of my career. And I didn't sort of keep going down the road I was going down.
Yeah, I agree. I think I had the same book in terms of nutrient timing. It was like I think it was at that time, there was just an amount of it. I think it was relatively evidence-based for the time it was out.
It was fully fucking referenced. Yeah.
But then as science develops, you learn more, you realize, oh my gosh, that was peddling a load of shit, which is good because you found the right references and resources. And that's why I think you have to be careful with, I think books are great, but like you mentioned, there are so many books out there and there are some terrible books out there. So textbooks generally are good, ones that are actually educating people on courses, maybe, for example. Or actually, I'm going to show this one because I got it sent to me a few months ago, Advanced Personal Training.
Yes. I've heard that's really good.
So I'm just digging through it and it's fantastic. If I could have read that as soon as I was starting training even or getting into personal training, that's amazing because it just has it, people look towards systematic reviews or meta-analyses as the gold standard in terms of those, but a textbook takes all of that and puts it in, whereas you will get people on social media will use kind of the fact that we know science is important and they cherry pick a study and they forget all the other ones that are contradicting it and they'll say this is the way, and then that again gets shared. So it's just further ways that social media can be dangerous. And I guess actually that brings me to, and you talked about call out culture, and it was something I was going to talk about, in that from the sounds of things, you feel like that can be productive when done in the right way. So if there are people kind of, I guess, listening and they're seeing people do it or they're thinking about doing it, what's the kind of ethical and right way to go about it that you're seeing as something that's productive?
Yeah, I don't want to be the one that sort of sits on the moral high ground and, tells people how to do things. But for me personally, if I call somebody out, I do it without using their name or tagging them or making any reference to them. I attack the information, right? And I'll attack that with better information, right? It's not the person. I look at these things, it's not a me versus you thing, right? It's nothing personal. It's just about the information. And that's in cases where I might not know the person, or I've got no sort of like reason to reach out to them, or maybe they don't even know who I am. And I just don't think it's a really good idea to sort of engage in that, right? I just put up some opposing views, which I think are better. And then I let the people sort of decide, right? But if you're going to call somebody out and use their name and stuff, I would hope that if somebody was ever doing that to me, that they would come to me first and be like, hey, Jacob, you put out this, I disagree. Can you show me why you put out this information? We would have a discussion about it. If it was, quite a productive conversation, they were nice about it. They weren't, just being, assholes. And we still couldn't agree. And they said, hey, just letting you know, I'm going to be, posting about this and I'm going to use your name and stuff. At that point, what can I do? Right? That's fair game, man. Like that's, I think, probably the best way I can think of to go about calling somebody out is trying to have a conversation with them. If you still can't agree, then giving you the heads up. And if you can't agree and they, things get sort of bitter and nasty, well, I think that's a problem a bigger problem than the information that they're putting out. Right. I think those people need to sort of take a look at themselves and try to figure out why they can't sort of have a discussion without getting emotional and, calling people names and stuff like that. But yeah, I guess that'd be my sort of approach is start with the information. If you're going to go through with calling someone out publicly and, sort of vilifying them, making them look bad, it's like these people's careers, Steve, like it's not nice. Yeah. It's just not fucking nice, like to do that to anybody. Just be a good human, right? And like attack the information, fight information with information, not the person, don't try to, put people down. Like if you're good at what you do, you don't need to put other people down. You elevate other people while you're elevating yourself, but yeah, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
I think that was well said. That, I mean, it aligns really well with my kind of philosophy behind it, because it's always been something I've been like I'd like to stay out of that, because
I can't imagine you calling someone out, bro. You're way too nice.
It's nothing I'm very comfortable with. I don't really like debates and these sort of things. I like people to agree and kind of be on the same page and those sort of things. But I think if you are going to do it,
you're a big teddy bear.
Yeah, it needs to be respectful. And I think it's unfortunate that it can be used as a form of essentially bullying, and you can bring down someone's business through this. And at the same, like you said, trying to elevate both if you're going to do it, but very often it's dragging one person down to springboard yourself. And that's the scary thing for me, for like, again, where people just aren't giving someone a chance, because social media, again, you can control it in terms of deleting comments, blocking people, and you can't have a full-fledged conversation, and people can kind of straw man you, and from the outside in, it can be super challenging. And so I think I can't really see a good way of doing it apart from, like you said, if you don't know for the person at all, just attack information. If you know the person, where it's going to be clear that you're kind of attacking them, have a conversation with them to try and like get an understanding. And then it isn't like an attack. It's more of like a fundamental disagreement on something that, again, it's about the information.
It's just discourse, you know what I mean? Like discourse is good. Like, if people had disagreements on things and then, had an Instagram live and disagreed about like that, and they did it respectfully, like people would flock to that, man. Like, they'd probably get a bit bored when they realize, oh, there's no one like punching on here and whatever, right? Like, because people want to see a punch on, but that's because they're using the platform for entertainment, not education, right? You've had some brilliant debates on your podcast because they're entertaining a little bit, like, Lyle and Mike, that's always fucking entertaining. We probably can't say that for legal reasons. They're entertaining as much as they are educational. But on social media, the call out culture is just for entertainment. It's just people doing things like nasty things to people and just not being, good humans because they're trying to get attention. They would not do that to their face.
No.
Like I guarantee you, I have a rule. If I say something about somebody to anybody or online, I'll say it to their face. And I think anybody who knows me well enough that if I say something about you and it comes back to you, hear it, you can bet your bottom dollar that I'll say it to your face, or I would have said it to your face prior, right? Because I will not say things about people that I would not say if I met them in person or if I saw them, had a conversation with them. And I think that's the issue, is everyone hides behind their screen. They're all keyboard warriors and they're very tough and brave, when they've got their followers jumping in and, bullying this person. But, at the end of the day, like, unless you'd say it to someone's face, just don't say it at all, unless you'd have that disagreement, publicly, in front of a room of 100 people, don't do it online, like, what's the point? Like, you're disingenuous. That's not authentic. And that comes back to what we were saying before. It's like, I think they're the kind of people who are, red flag.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that makes a ton of sense. And then, the final thing I have for you, Jacob, is I think I imagine you experience this with some of your coaches that are coming up, where they've done all the kind of learning. They're like actually very educated coaches, but they come through this Dunning-Kruger where they used to think they knew a lot, and now they feel like they know fuck all because there's so much out there. Do you have any advice for that individual? Because I imagine that's where a lot of the audience sits. I sometimes feel like I sit where I'm like, man, there's just so much I don't know. How can you give confidence to that person? Because they are the person that should be educating because they know how much they don't know, which is a really good position to be in.
Well, I think first and foremost, the awareness that you feel that way means that you know a bit. As hard as that is to wrap your head around, the fact that you actually don't think you know enough is the best, like most, positive sign that you've actually learned a little bit about something, and that you should be proud of that fact, because it demonstrates intellectual humility. And, if you're in a position where you're feeling a little bit, I guess, overwhelmed, doubting yourself, you're feeling all of those, things like imposter syndrome, because that's what happens when we sort of come out the Dunning-Kruger, right? Is we feel as though, we're an imposter. We don't really know that much about our topic, intellectual humility is a really, really good thing. We need to appreciate that and be proud that we're becoming somewhat, humble in our, intelligence, I guess. Intellectual humility, like, people tend to hold like those favorable views of their abilities in like social and intellectual domains, right? And that overestimation occurs in part because people who are unskilled in those domains, right, suffer like two things. One, not only do those people like reach the wrong conclusions and make unfortunate choices, but their incompetence sort of robs them of the metacognitive ability to realize it, right? So when you become somewhat aware of how little you know, you're actually competent because you don't sort of misconstrue your abilities, right? And that's what I think people need to really appreciate. It's like, when you get to that point, you're killing it. Like, keep going. But my advice sort of from there would be just continue to be curious. Like, just keep that curiosity alive. Wherever it sort of flows, just follow. It's like a butterfly. You never know where it's going to go, like, at that point, because people start to get bored. I've seen that a lot, is like, once they come out, they're like, oh, well, I know like enough about hypertrophy. They'll still have those doubts of like, okay, well, I don't really know as much as Brett Schoenfeld. Like, I feel like an imposter for that. Like, but I feel like I know enough. Like, what's next? The next step is like really hard to take, because that means going real deep. So you got breadth of knowledge, which is knowing a little bit about a lot of different things. And you got depth of knowledge, which is knowing a lot about a singular domain. And to keep going in that Dunning-Kruger process means that you've got to keep going deeper and deeper, and that's a huge investment. So a lot of coaches, physique athletes out there, they're not going to be going that far because it's not usually worth it, right? There's so many other things to learn about. So you got to follow that curiosity around at that point, like a butterfly. Like, where's it going to go? Where's it going to land? And just keep reading. Just 10 pages a day, like, on the topics that matter. Stay up to date. Try to keep just refining your skills, like, about the things that you do in that process. You don't need to necessarily learn more, but you can become better at what you do, right? How quickly you read, how much you can process in that time, how quickly you can source information and solve certain problems. Like, keep honing those skills, that are involved in the process of education. Listen, write, teach others. Like, use the knowledge that you have in different ways, right? Being able to speak about it, being able to write about it, being able to display it, visually, like I used to do in graphics. Like, that was such a fun, like, period where I was trying to like represent all these concepts and ideas, like, visually. Like, that was so challenging. And it really made me question like how much I know. And it was like such a cool experience. Just continue to observe, like, look at the people who are where you want to be, right? Don't copy them completely, but just look where they are and just try to find the things that they do that make them successful, and emulate that and use that as information to help you, through that process. But it's a hard thing coming out the other side of the Dunning-Kruger and sort of waking up, and realizing, fuck, I know nothing. Like it's demoralizing, but at the end of the day, that's when you're doing a lot better than the average person, and you're confident. And I think at that point, you've just got to continue to turn competency into proficiency, and then proficiency hopefully into mastery.
No, I think that's excellently described. And I think you're completely right. Like, people who have got through that are now in the position where actually, like, you actually do really know a lot, and you should be confident in that. And whenever I at least feel that sense of like imposter syndrome, and like I compare myself to someone like the Brad Schoenfeld or whatever, I'm like, man, he just brings out all these kind of terms and things that I like mechanistically have not got a clue about or what have you. It's like, well, practically, how much do I need to know about that for helping my clients? And then you can just look at the people you've helped, the people who you are currently helping. And I like to boil things back to principles. Like if I read something, like it's a new study about something, it's like, oh, wow, that goes like, that's deep. That like, is that changing things? And I try and like, okay, where does that fit within the overarching principles that I've kind of learned about? That always helps breed confidence. But yeah, I see people like, there's loads of courses, there's loads of like different research reviews, and they're like subscribing to them all. They're trying to learn all these stuff. And I'm like, part of it is like you said, just practicing what you're doing and learning through your clients and doing that. And then, like you said, like if you find something interesting, kind of go down that one route and don't try and do everything at once, because you'll end up doing nothing.
Absolutely, man. I think, knowledge without action is a rather, sort of futile endeavor.
Awesome. Jacob, thank you so much for coming on. I think this has hopefully been a really, really helpful discussion for people. I've enjoyed it a lot. And if people want to learn more from you, they want to learn about the mentorship course potentially, or where should they head?
Yeah, just search JPS Education on Instagram or jpshealthandfitness.com.au, and you'll find all of our resources, educational courses right there.
Fantastic. I'll make sure that's all linked below so people can check that out. And thank you again, guys, for listening. We'll talk to you soon. So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Flor. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries.
Our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
The exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy, we're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge. And I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.